The Great Hall of the Galaxy Council was the most powerful room in the known universe. It sat at the center of Keth Station, a space station so large that it had its own weather systems inside. The ceiling was so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Around the circular floor, thousands of seats rose up in rings, each one filled with a representative from one of the 47 member species of the Council. The noise was constant, a low, rolling hum of different languages, translated in real time by tiny devices worn in the ears or pressed against the skin. It was the kind of place that was meant to make any visitor feel small. Ambassador Yara Osai did not feel small. She felt angry. She stood at the center podium, alone, under the bright white lights. She was a tall woman with short-cropped hair and dark brown skin, and she wore the blue uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. Behind her, on the great curved wall, the blue and green image of Earth rotated slowly. It was the only home she had ever known, and today, the Council was going to decide what to do with it. She had been speaking for 20 minutes. She had prepared for 6 months. She talked about Earth's history, not the wars or the failures, but the progress. She talked about how humanity had cleaned its oceans after nearly destroying them. She talked about the schools built in deserts, the hospitals floated into flood zones, the forests replanted by hand across 3 continents. She talked about the 12 languages spoken in her own family, and how her grandmother had once told her that the most human thing a person could do was try again after losing. She was asking the Council to give Earth a seat at the table, a real seat, a vote, a voice. No one was listening. She could see it in their faces, or the things that served as faces for each species. The Vorath, the tall gray-skinned beings who had called this session, were already leaning back in their chairs. The Arathi, the 6-limbed creatures from the cold moons of the outer systems, were talking quietly among themselves. The Delari, blue, thin, ancient, were watching their own screens. High Speaker Vasran, the Vorath who presided over the council, raised one long finger. A soft chime rang through the hall. It meant, "The floor is closed." Yara stopped speaking. She looked up at Vasran. "Ambassador Osai," Vasran said, in the flat, machine-translated voice that made all Vorath sound like they were reading from a document. "The Council thanks you for your address. The matter before us today is not Earth's past. It is Earth's present classification." He tapped the panel in front of him. On the great wall behind Yara, her image of Earth was replaced by a long document. At the top, in 12 languages, were the words, "VORATH Accord Classification Order." "Earth is hereby designated Class 0, Vasran continued. "No council seat, no interstellar military rights, no sovereign defense grid beyond your home system's inner boundary. The Pale Armada will arrive within 90 standard cycles to confirm compliance." Yara did not move. She kept her eyes on Vasran. "This is a death sentence," she said. Her voice was calm. Vasran tilted his head, the Vorath gesture for polite disagreement. "It is a classification. Earth remains free to conduct internal governance as it sees fit. You are simply not ready for full membership." "Not ready," she repeated. "The vote was taken this morning," he said. 41 in favor, 6 abstentions, no votes against." No votes against. Not even a single species had raised an objection. 2 large Vorath security officers appeared at the edge of the podium. They did not touch her. They did not need to. The message was clear. She picked up her data tablet, turned, and walked out of the center of the room. The doors of the council chamber opened for her automatically. They closed behind her with a sound like a final word. She stood in the corridor outside, alone. The corridor was white and smooth and perfectly lit. It smelled like recycled air. She pressed her back against the wall and looked up at the ceiling. 90 cycles. That was roughly 3 Earth months. She sent the transmission to Earth before she had even reached her transport ship. She encrypted it at the highest level and marked it urgent, government eyes only. Then she sat down in her seat, put her head in her hands, and let herself feel the weight of what had just happened for exactly 4 minutes. Then she stopped. She had work to do. On Earth, The transmission arrived at the United Nations Emergency Communications Center at 3:47 in the morning, local Geneva time. The duty officer who received it read it twice, then called his supervisor. His supervisor read it once, then called the Secretary General. By 6 in the morning, the heads of every major government on the planet had been woken up. They gathered by secure video link in the emergency chamber. 53 heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, and chancellors. Some were still in their pajamas. Some had already dressed in their full formal uniforms, as if clothes could make this feel less real. The Secretary General, a quiet man from Brazil named Henrique Moura, read the full text of the Voreth Accord aloud. He did not add anything. He did not take anything away. When he finished, the room was silent. Then the President of the United States asked the question that everyone was thinking. How long do we have? 90 cycles, Moura said. Approximately 87 Earth days. More silence. A general from the Chinese military, a woman named Chen Wei, who had spent 30 years preparing for threats that she always assumed would come from Earth, leaned forward toward her camera. What exactly does the Pale Armada do when it arrives? She asked. The council liaison officer, a nervous young man from Norway, pulled up the relevant files on his screen. He had been studying council military history for 3 years. He did not enjoy what he had found. They disable the target world's orbital defense systems first, he said. Then they establish a monitoring perimeter. Any military vessel that tries to leave the system is destroyed. After that, the world is contained. It remains functional. People keep living, but nothing with weapons ever leaves the atmosphere again. And if someone resists, Chen Wei asked. The liaison officer was quiet for a moment. There are 12 recorded cases of Class 0 enforcement in Council history, he said. In 11 of those cases, the target species attempted resistance. None of them survived past the second engagement. The room went quiet again. Outside the windows of the various offices and homes where these leaders were watching, the sun was rising over different parts of the world. Someone in Tokyo could see the harbor. Someone in Lagos could see the green hills. Someone in Buenos Aires could hear birds. Moura looked at the faces on his screen. He thought about the word that the Voreth ambassador had used, compliance. I am going to ask each of you a direct question, he said. And I need honest answers because we have no time for anything else. Are we going to comply? No one answered right away. Then one by one they started shaking their heads. Not one of them said yes. Moura nodded slowly. He had expected this. He had hoped for this. He had also feared it because now the hard part began. Then we have 87 days, he said, and we need to use every single one of them. He closed the session. He sat alone in his office for a long moment, looking at the image of Earth still rotating on his screen. The same image Yara had shown the council. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person he needed most. Dr. Solarin, he said when the line connected, I hope you are awake. I am always awake, said the voice on the other end. I saw the transmission. I have already started. Moura let out a long breath. Good. Because if there was anyone on Earth who might find a way through this, it was Emeka Solarin. Outside, the birds were still singing. Emeka Solarin had not slept in 2 days, and he looked exactly like it. He was a short, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with gray spreading through his hair and permanent dark circles under his eyes that had nothing to do with the current crisis. He had always looked like this. His students at the Lagos Institute of Applied Physics had once joked that he was born tired. He had not disagreed. He had simply kept working. His office was now the center of the most important project in human history, and it looked like a storm had passed through it. Papers, tablets, printed diagrams, and coffee cups covered every surface. 3 large screens on the wall showed different calculations. His 2 assistants, a young woman named Priya from Mumbai, and a young man named Seo Jun from Seoul, were asleep in their chairs, which Pmucka allowed because they had earned it. He was studying the Council's published military records. This was not hard to do. The Galaxy Council kept detailed records of every enforcement action it had ever taken, and it published them openly. The idea was to discourage resistance. If any world could look up what had happened to those who fought back and see the outcome, they would be less likely to try. It was a strategy built on fear, and it had worked for over 300 years. Mucka read through each of the 12 recorded cases. He took notes. He built timelines. He looked at the weapons used, the tactics employed, the response times, the communication patterns of the Pale Armada. He looked for gaps. He looked for patterns the Council might not have noticed about themselves. He found several. The most important one was this: the Pale Armada had never fought a species that had already studied them. Every species that had resisted had done so out of desperation, using whatever weapons they already had, fighting in the way they already knew. None of them had adapted. None of them had looked at the Armada the way an engineer looks at a machine, not with fear, but with curiosity. What are your limits? Where do you break? What did the people who designed you never think to protect against? Mucka leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He thought about a phrase he had heard his mother use when he was a child, growing up in the years after the Lagos floods. She had said it whenever things got hard. She had said, "You do not win by being stronger. You win by thinking longer." He picked up his pen and started writing. Meanwhile, in a conference room in Geneva, Secretary General Ma was making the call that he had been preparing for since 6 in the morning. He had drafted the Prague Compact in his head before he had even finished breakfast. It was not a complicated document. It did not need to be. It was, in essence, a single idea written out in legal language. Every nation on Earth agrees, right now, to set aside every disagreement, every border dispute, every old grievance and new tension, and work as one body until this crisis is resolved. He had expected resistance. He had not expected how fast it came apart. By noon, he had spoken to 40 governments. By 2 in the afternoon, he had spoken to all of them. By 6 in the evening, the document was ready. By midnight, less than 18 hours after the emergency call, the Prague Compact had been signed by every nation on Earth. It was the fastest political agreement in human history. On the news channels, commentators struggled to explain it. Some called it fear. Some called it reason. Some called it the thing that humans had always been capable of but had never quite managed to hold onto for long enough. General Chun Wei was not interested in what the commentators were saying. She was interested in shipyards. She had spent the afternoon on calls with the heads of every major space construction program on Earth and in the solar system. Luna had 2 large shipyards. Mars had 3. The asteroid belt, spread across dozens of mining operations and deep space platforms, had the pieces of at least 6 more that could be assembled quickly with the right direction. All of them had been building the same things for the past decade: colony transports, cargo haulers, scientific research vessels. Big, slow ships designed to carry people and supplies safely across long distances. "I need you to stop," she told each of them, in the same clear, direct voice she used for all important things. "I need you to start building something else." She did not tell them what exactly, not yet. That was Pmucka's part. He had asked for 72 hours to complete his analysis. She had given him 48. He delivered in 36. The briefing took place in the secure chamber beneath the UN building in Geneva, which had been chosen simply because it was already built and already secured. It was a plain gras room with a long table and too many chairs, and it smelled faintly of old coffee. Pmucka stood at the front with his screen, his notes, and a look on his face that Chun Wei had learned to read. It was the look he wore when he was about to say something that no one else had thought of yet. "The Council believes Earth is helpless," he said, without any introduction or greeting. "They are wrong, but not for the reason you might think." He pulled up his first diagram. Every species the Council has ever enforced against had one thing in common. They were all, at the time of enforcement, roughly where the Council expected them to be. They had the weapons they were supposed to have. They had the ships they were supposed to have. The Council's models were built on those assumptions. He clicked to the next diagram. It showed Earth's industrial output, not military but total: manufacturing, energy, raw material processing. Earth was never supposed to be a military power, so the Council never modeled us as one. But here is what they missed. The infrastructure we built for space colonization over the last 40 years is, with modification, some of the most capable rapid production capacity in this region of the galaxy. We did not build it for war. We built it for survival, but it does not much care what we use it for. The room was very quiet. "I need 6 weeks," he said. "I need every shipyard, every fabrication facility, and every engineer who has ever worked with propulsion or materials. I need the Prague Compact to mean what it says. And I need everyone in this room to stop thinking about what we cannot do and start thinking about what the Council never thought to model." Chun-Wei looked at him for a long moment. "What are you going to build?" she asked. He smiled for the first time since this had all started. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had already solved a very hard problem and was now simply waiting for the world to catch up. "Something they have never seen before," he said. Outside, the world was already moving. On Luna, the first colony transport was being taken apart. Its engines were being removed. Its hull was being stripped back to the frame. The workers doing it were not sad about it. They had read the compact. They knew what it meant. On Mars, the director of the Olympus Fabrication Complex, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Rana Al-Farsi, had already started reassigning her entire workforce without being asked. She had read Plucka's preliminary notes, which had been distributed to all senior engineers that morning, and she had understood immediately what was needed. She had called her staff together in the main bay. 300 workers gathered between the half-finished ribs of what had been intended as a deep space science vessel. "We are going to do something that has never been done before," she had told them. "And we are going to do it fast. I do not want to hear that something is impossible. I want to hear how long it takes and what you need. That is all." Nobody asked if they were going to win. Nobody had time for that question. They had work to do. Deep in the outer solar system, past Neptune, past the scattered disk of rocks and ice, the first scouts of the Pale Armada had already entered human territory. They were small ships, fast, quiet, designed to observe and report. Their mission was simple: confirm that Earth was compliant, or not yet alarmed, or in the early stages of the kind of helpless panic that the Council had seen many times before. Their sensors showed the solar system largely quiet. Some increased activity around Luna and Mars, but nothing that their models flagged as significant. A Class 0 world always had some brief surge of activity before compliance. It was normal. The scout commander filed her report. She noted the activity. She rated the threat level as low. She had never been more wrong about anything in her life. The Pale Armada crossed the frost line on a Tuesday. That was what the Earth analysts called it, the frost line, the invisible boundary near Jupiter where the solar system turned cold and dark and the ice moons began. It was not an official border. It was not a legal line, but it was the point at which Fleet Admiral Kuthsaran, commander of the Pale Armada's lead division, expected to find empty space and a quiet, frightened world somewhere in the distance ahead. What he found instead made him stop. He was standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Varith vessel known as the Undying Patience, a name chosen to remind client worlds that the Council was ancient and eternal and could wait as long as it needed to. The bridge was clean and cold, as all Varith spaces were. The crew moved in the slow, careful way of people who had done this many times before. This was their 7th enforcement deployment in 12 years. None of the others had been difficult. The lead sensor officer made a sound that, in Voreth body language, meant something between surprise and confusion. "Admiral," she said, "I am reading multiple contacts, structured formation, inner system origin." Kuthsaran walked to her station and looked at the display. There were ships, not 1 or 2 or even a dozen. There were hundreds of them, spread across a wide arc of space, positioned between the Armada and the inner planets. They were not arranged in a line, which was how most species deployed defensive forces. They were arranged in a pattern that the Armada's tactical systems could not immediately name. It looked almost like a net. "Classification?" he asked. "Unknown configuration," the officer said. "Hull materials are consistent with Earth manufacturing, but the design profiles do not match any vessel class in our records." That was the moment Keth Saron should have slowed down. That was the moment a different kind of commander might have called for more information, sent probes, taken time to understand what he was looking at. He had been in the Council military for 30 years. He had never needed to do that. He gave the order to proceed. The Armada moved forward in its standard suppression formation, a wedge shape, the strongest ships at the point, designed to punch through whatever resistance it met and scatter the defenders before they could organize. It was the formation that had worked 11 times before. The Council had a saying among its military planners: "A method that has always worked is a method you trust." The human ships did not move. They held their positions as the Armada approached. Keth Saron watched them on his screens, waiting for the thing that always happened: the panic, the break in formation, the individual ships that started running or grouping together in a defensive cluster. Fear always expressed itself the same way. Fear made order fall apart. The human ships held. He opened a hailing frequency, standard protocol. "This is Fleet Admiral Keth Saron of the Pale Armada, acting under authority of the Galaxy Council and the Voreth Accord. You are ordered to stand down and allow enforcement passage. Any resistance will be treated as a hostile act. You have one standard unit of time to comply." There was a pause. Then a single human voice came back. It was a woman's voice, clear and unhurried. "This is Admiral Daria Volkov, commanding the Earth Expeditionary Defense Force. We have received your order. We decline." Keth Saron blinked. In 22 years of enforcement actions, no one had ever simply said, "We decline." He gave the order to fire. The Armada's lead ships opened up with suppression beams, long, wide-area energy weapons designed to overwhelm shields and disable propulsion. They were not weapons meant to destroy. They were weapons meant to stop. Against every previous opponent they had faced, the first salvo had ended the battle. Ships went dark, lost power, drifted. The crews survived. Compliance followed. The human ships did not go dark. Their shields absorbed the first wave. The analysts on Keth Saron's bridge were already reporting the data. The human vessels had shield technology that was recalibrating in real time, adapting to the frequency of the Armada's weapons. It was not supposed to be possible. The Council had classified Earth as a Class 0 world specifically because its technology was assessed as too primitive for this kind of adaptation. The assessment had been wrong. Admiral Volkov had spent 6 weeks with Emeka Solarin and his team. She had listened to every briefing. She had asked the questions that the engineers sometimes forgot to answer because they assumed everyone already knew. She was not a scientist, but she understood one thing perfectly: you do not fight a stronger enemy the way they expect to be fought. The human fleet split. It did not fall back. It did not cluster together. It split into 7 separate groups, each one moving in a different direction, and then it began to do something that no Voreth tactical model had ever predicted. It disappeared. Not literally. The ships were still there, but they were no longer where the Armada was aiming. Emeka had studied the Armada's historical targeting systems and found a gap, a brief delay, about 3 seconds, between when the system detected a moving target and when it locked on. 3 seconds was nothing in normal combat. 3 seconds was everything when the human ships were designed around it. They had built a maneuvering doctrine based entirely on that 3-second window. Every human pilot had drilled it 10,000 times in simulation. Move. The beam follows. Move again before it arrives. The first 6 hours of the battle were like nothing in the Armada's records. The human fleet engaged the Armada's outer formation from 5 different angles at once, then withdrew before the Armada could concentrate fire. They came back from unexpected directions. They did not fight to hold ground. They fought to make the Armada keep reacting, keep turning, keep guessing. Every time the Armada formed up for a coordinated strike, the human fleet was already somewhere else. And then the human ships began firing back. The weapons Emeka had designed were not copies of the Armada's own technology. They were built around a different principle entirely. The Armada used energy weapons, clean, precise, and very effective against shields. The human weapons used focused kinetic projectiles accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. The Armada's shields were designed to absorb and disperse energy. They were not designed for something solid traveling that fast. The first Armada vessel that took a direct hit lost 2 entire decks. The second lost its main drive. By hour 3, the Armada had lost 11 ships in its forward formation. Kethsaron had not lost 11 ships in his entire career. He pulled the formation back. He regrouped. He tried the wedge again from a different angle. The human fleet dissolved in front of it and reformed behind it. He tried splitting his own formation. The humans picked off the isolated groups one by one. He tried holding position and waiting for the humans to commit to a full attack. They did not. They kept the pressure on with small strikes from long range, wearing down his ships without ever presenting a target that his full fleet could hit. At hour 6, Kethsaron did something he had never done in a deployment. He retreated. Not far, not permanently. He pulled back to the outer edge of the frost line and called a stop to the engagement. He needed to think. He needed to look at the data. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. His sensor officer gave him the numbers. The Armada had lost 31 ships, more than a third of his forward division. Earth had lost 9. He sat in his command chair and looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he composed a message to the council. He was a careful man, and he wrote the message 3 times before he sent it, trying to find words that were accurate without sounding alarmed. He was not sure he succeeded. "The Earth Defense Force is not behaving as models predict," he wrote. "Their technology exceeds all assessments. Their tactics are unlike any recorded in Council history. I am requesting reinforcement and additional tactical analysis before proceeding." He sent the message, then he looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the inner system behind that net of human ships was Earth, small, blue, unremarkable according to every file he had ever read. He was beginning to think those files had missed something important. In the council chambers, the message from Kethsaron arrived in the middle of a routine session on trade regulations. High Speaker Vosron read it once. He set it aside. He told the council that the situation was being handled and that reinforcements would be dispatched. A younger delegate from the Arathi Collective raised her hand. She had voted against the Vorath Accord. She had been one of the 6 abstentions. "Should we perhaps review the assessment of Earth's capabilities?" she asked. Vosron looked at her with the flat, patient expression he used for questions he considered obvious. "The situation is being handled," he said again. The session continued. The trade regulations were discussed. And in the cold space near Jupiter, the human fleet held its position, waited, and watched. Volkov walked the deck of her flagship slowly after the engagement, stopping to speak with the pilots and crew who had just done the most difficult thing any human force had ever been asked to do. They were tired. Some of them were shaking. A few had not yet fully understood that they had won the first round. She stopped by the viewport at the end of the main corridor and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Armada was licking its wounds. They would come back, with more ships, more firepower, and perhaps a little more respect. Good, she needed them to start paying attention, because what came next required them to be looking in exactly the right direction, which meant she needed to make sure they were looking the wrong way. The council sent reinforcements. 2 full wings of the Pale Armada arrived at the Frost Line 12 days after Kethsaron's first engagement. That was fast, by council standards. Normally, moving that many ships took planning, resupply, coordination across multiple systems. The fact that they had done it in 12 days was a sign of how seriously the council was now taking the situation, or at least, how seriously certain people within it were. High Speaker Vosron was not among those people. He still referred to Earth in council sessions as an administrative complication. He still used the word compliance as if it were simply a matter of time. But he had approved the reinforcement request without argument, and that was something. Kethsaron received the new ships with quiet relief. He had spent the 12 days studying. He had reviewed every second of the engagement data. He had run the numbers through every tactical model the Voreth military possessed. The results had not been encouraging. The models were not built for an opponent like this. He sent a report to the Council's Military Intelligence Division, requesting updated assessments of Earth's current capability. The report came back in 3 days. It used the same old data. It had not been updated. He sent a second report. He attached his own engagement data. He highlighted the sections in bold. He received a form letter thanking him for his thoroughness. He stopped sending reports. On Earth, Admiral Volkov received word of the incoming reinforcements from her scout network. A loose web of small, quiet vessels positioned throughout the outer system that the Armada had not found because they were not looking for them. She called a meeting of her senior commanders aboard the flagship. They gathered around a table in the briefing room, 12 men and women from 12 different countries, all wearing the same uniform now, the deep navy blue of the Earth Expeditionary Defense Force, the flag of every nation stitched into the sleeve in a ring, too small to see individually, large enough to know they were all there. She showed them the reinforcement numbers. She watched their faces. Nobody panicked. Nobody went pale. A few of them leaned forward. "We knew they would send more," said Commander Arjun Mehta from New Delhi, who commanded the 2nd Fleet Wing. "The question is whether we fight them here or somewhere else." "Somewhere else," Volkov said. She pulled up a star chart. She pointed to 3 systems, not Earth's system, not even close to it. All 3 were deep in Council territory. All 3 hosted large bases used by the Pale Armada to stage enforcement operations. "If we fight them at the Frost Line again, we win another defensive engagement," she said. "And then they send more ships, and we fight again, and they send more ships again. That is a game we eventually lose because they have more ships than we do." She tapped the 3 systems on the chart. "But if we take the fight to them, if we hit what they use to project power into our system, then we are no longer just defending. We are changing the problem." The room was quiet for a moment. Mehta said they would be going into Council space. He was not objecting. He was simply saying it out loud as a fact. "Yes," Volkov said, "we would be." Another pause. "When?" asked Commander Fatima al-Rashid from Cairo, who commanded the 3rd Wing. "Before the reinforcements get here. While they are moving toward us, we move toward them." 3 days later, the Earth Expeditionary Fleet, 80 ships under Volkov's direct command, made its first jump beyond the solar system. The jump drive technology was one of Emeka's gifts. The Council used a standard fold drive that the Armada had used for over a century. Emeka had studied the physics behind it and found that the standard implementation was conservative. The Voreth had settled on a safe, reliable method and never pushed further. Emeka had pushed further. The result was a drive that was 30% faster and, critically, left a different energy signature. The Council's detection systems were calibrated for the standard signature. They did not catch the human fleet leaving. The 3 bases were not military fortresses. They were logistics stations, places where ships refueled, where crews rested, where supplies were organized before a deployment. They were defended, but not heavily. The Armada had never needed to defend its own territory seriously. Nothing had ever attacked it. The human fleet arrived at the first base and did something unexpected. They did not destroy it. They spent 40 minutes disabling every orbital platform, every docked vessel, every communication array. They were precise and methodical. No life support systems were touched. The station itself, where thousands of crew members lived and worked, was left completely alone. Only the weapons and the ships and the communication towers were neutralized. Then Volkov opened a broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Daria Volkov of Earth. We have disabled your military infrastructure at this location. Your personnel are unharmed. We will leave now. If your government continues to pursue enforcement action against Earth, we will return to this location and the next one on our list. We have no interest in hurting anyone. We are interested in being left alone." She closed the channel. The fleet jumped. The second and third bases were handled the same way. The effect on the Council was profound. Not because of the military damage, though that was significant. The effect was the message. Every species in the Council received the broadcast because the human fleet had transmitted on every frequency simultaneously. For the first time, the galaxy heard Earth speak, not through a diplomat being escorted out of a chamber, but through a fleet of ships that had crossed into Council territory, done what it said it would do, hurt nobody, and left. Back in his office, Emeka was not thinking about any of this. He was thinking about jump lanes. The Council's reinforcement fleet was moving toward Earth through a specific set of jump corridors, the stable pathways between stars that made long-distance travel reliable. Jump lanes were not physical things. They were gravitational structures, existing naturally in space, discovered and mapped over centuries. They were also, Emeka had realized, vulnerable to interference in a way that no one had ever tried before, because no one had ever needed to. The cascade array was his strangest invention. It worked by generating a precise pattern of gravitational pulses along a jump lane's entry point. The pulses were not large. They did not destroy anything. They simply made the lane unstable, not permanently, but long enough. A ship that tried to enter a disrupted lane would not be destroyed. It would be thrown off course, emerging from fold space somewhere entirely wrong. Not dangerous, just very, very far from where it intended to go. He deployed 3 cascade arrays at the 3 main lanes the reinforcement fleet was using. The first wing of the reinforcement fleet arrived at the frost line. The second and third wings did not. They emerged from fold space in completely different parts of the galaxy and spent days finding their bearings. In the Council chambers, the reports arrived one after another. The Armada's staging bases neutralized. The reinforcement wings scattered. Volkov's fleet back inside the solar system before anyone could respond. The high speaker read the reports in silence. Around him, the chamber was more chaotic than it had been in living memory. Delegates were standing. Some were arguing loudly. Some were trying to call for order. The Arathi delegate who had asked about Earth's capabilities weeks ago was not saying anything. She was watching Vosron very carefully. He set down the last report and folded his long gray hands on the table. Then he said something that, in 30 years of Council service, he had never said before. "We may have been," he said slowly, choosing each word with great care, "incomplete in our assessment of humanity." The chamber went quiet. The Arathi delegate said nothing, but she made a small note on her data tablet, marked it for transmission, and sent it to a private address that she had been holding onto for several weeks, the contact details for Ambassador Yara Osai. The note said only, "We should talk." The message arrived in Yara Osai's quarters aboard the Earth diplomatic transport at 2 in the morning. She had been awake anyway. She had not slept well since the day she walked out of the Council chamber, and now, weeks later. With the war going better than anyone had dared to hope, she slept even less. There was too much to think about, too much to plan. A fleet winning battles was only one kind of victory, and Yara had spent her career understanding that it was rarely the kind that lasted. The message was from Delegate Sieraveth of the Arathi Collective. It was short. It said only, "We should talk." Yara read it twice. Then she got up, made herself a cup of tea, and composed a reply. It said, "I am ready when you are." She had been waiting for this, not from the Arathi specifically, but from someone. The Council was a coalition, and coalitions cracked under pressure. The 6 abstentions on the day of the vote had always been her thread to pull. She had simply been waiting for the right moment, for someone on the other side to feel the pressure enough to reach. The moment had come. Over the next 4 days, Yara conducted 11 private conversations. She spoke to the Irathi delegate. She spoke to the representatives of 3 small species who had voted for the accord only because the Vorath had applied quiet pressure behind closed doors. She spoke to a Delari academic who had published a paper 3 years ago arguing that the Council's classification system was scientifically flawed. She spoke to a Vorath junior diplomat who, in a moment of unusual candor, told her that many in the Vorath government were frightened, but that their government's pride was making it very difficult to say so in public. "That is useful to know," Yara told him. She did not use any of it against anyone. She did not threaten. She did not bargain. She simply listened and asked careful questions and built up, piece by piece, a picture of what the Council was actually thinking beneath the official statements. And what she found was this: nearly everyone wanted this to end. They just did not know how to end it without losing face. She knew how to help with that. In the meantime, Admiral Volkov was making sure the military pressure did not let up. She had not pushed deep into Council territory again. The 3 base strikes had made the point she needed to make. Earth could reach them if it chose to. Pressing further would have changed the message from "we want to be left alone" to "we want to take something from you," and that was a message Yara had specifically asked her not to send. Instead, Volkov kept the Pale Armada pinned at the Frost Line. Any ship that moved toward the inner system was met with the same response: not destruction, not even serious damage in most cases, just steady, patient resistance that cost the Armada more than it gained. The Cascade arrays had been repositioned to block 2 of the main jump lanes into the solar system entirely. The Armada could not reinforce without going the long way around, which added weeks to any deployment. The Council was, for the first time in its history, stuck. High Speaker Vosron finally requested a ceasefire on the 31st day after the first engagement. He made the request privately, through a back channel, to Secretary General Murrah. He phrased it as a pause for diplomatic assessment. Murrah read the message, showed it to Yara, and asked her what she thought. "He is asking for a way out that does not look like asking for a way out," she said. "Can we give him that?" She thought about it. "Not exactly, but we can give the Council a way out. That is different." Earth's response to the ceasefire request was simple. It said, "We will cease military operations when the Galaxy Council agrees to meet in full session with all 47 member species present to discuss the Terran Compact. We will bring a document. The Council will read it. After that, we can talk." The Council agreed. It took them 2 days to agree, which Yara knew meant that Vosron had spent 2 days trying to find a way to not agree, and had failed. The meeting was set for Keth Station, the same hall, the same seats, the same high ceiling where clouds sometimes formed. Yara traveled there alone. She had one assistant, a young man named Kofi who had been working for her for 3 years and who carried the document bag and said very little, which she appreciated. She had an honor guard of 12 Earth soldiers in formal dress uniform, which she had requested not for protection, but because she believed symbols mattered in rooms like this one. The hall was full. Every seat was taken. The noise was the same rolling hum of languages being translated in real time. The lights were the same bright white. The great curved wall showed, at the moment she entered, nothing, a blank slate. She walked to the center podium. She did not look at Vosron. She looked at all of them. "My name is Yara Osai," she said. "I was last in this room because you removed me from it. I am back because you asked me to come. I think that tells you most of what you need to know about how things have changed." A ripple of something passed through the hall, not quite laughter, not quite discomfort, something in between. She had Kofi place the document on the podium. It was 200 pages. It was called the Terran Compact. "I'm not going to read this to you," she said. "You can read it yourselves. But I am going to tell you what it is in simple terms so that there is no confusion about what Earth is asking for." She looked out at the 47 species gathered in front of her. We are asking for a permanent seat on this council. A real seat. A vote. A voice. We are asking for full legal standing under council law for Earth and for every other world currently classified as Class 0. We are asking for the Vorath Accord to be dissolved, and we are asking for an independent review of the classification system, conducted by scientists rather than politicians, to determine whether it has any legitimate basis. She paused. In return, Earth will stand down its military operations, dismantle the cascade arrays blocking your jump lanes, and return to the role we should have been playing all along, a member of this community, working alongside you, not in spite of you. The hall was quiet. Vosran looked at her from his elevated seat. His expression, as always, was very difficult to read. He was old. He had been on this council for longer than Yara had been alive. He had seen a great many things. She did not think he had seen this. "This is a significant set of demands," he said. "They are terms," she said, "not demands. There is a difference. Demands are made by people who do not care about the outcome. Terms are proposed by people who want both sides to walk away intact. We want the council intact. We believe it serves a purpose. We simply want to be part of it." Another silence. Then Delegate Sieraveth of the Arathi raised her hand. She spoke in her own language, soft and layered, and the translation took a moment to arrive in Yara's ear. "The Arathi Collective endorses the discussion of the Terran Compact," she said. One voice, but in a room that had been silent, one voice was everything. One by one, other delegates began to speak, not all of them in support. Some asked questions, some raised objections, some wanted changes to specific language in the document. This was expected. This was, in fact, the point. Yara had written the compact to be negotiated. She had made room in it for the council to push back and still feel like they had shaped the outcome. The session lasted 9 hours. At the end, the vote was taken. 38 in favor, 7 abstentions, 2 against, both Vorath conservatives who would have voted against anything that changed the order of things they had spent their lives building. The Terran Compact passed. Earth had a seat. Yara sat in the chair that had been brought to the center podium for her, a temporary seat, until a permanent one could be installed, and she watched the certification being processed on the Great Wall. The planet Earth, small and blue and green, appeared on the screen. Beside it, her name. Beside that, the words, "Permanent Representative." Later, in the corridor outside, a young Arathi delegate approached her. The Arathi were 6-limbed, and this one was young enough that her outer limbs were still a pale gold rather than the deep copper of an adult. She had large eyes and a careful way of moving. "Ambassador Osai," the young delegate said in careful, accented translation, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course," Yara said. The delegate was quiet for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "How did you know you could win?" she asked. "Not the military part, the rest, this part. How did you know it would end here and not somewhere worse?" Yara considered the question for a long moment. She thought about Secretary General Mura, up before dawn, calling 50 governments one by one. She thought about Emeka Solarin, who had not slept in 2 days before this all started and who had solved problems that the galaxy did not even know existed. She thought about Rania Al-Farsi in the Martian shipyard, telling 300 workers, "I do not want to hear that something is impossible." She thought about Volkov, standing at the viewport after the first battle, watching the stars and planning the next move. She thought about her grandmother, who had told her that the most human thing a person could do was try again after losing. "We did not know," she said. "We never needed certainty to fight. We only needed to believe it was worth trying." The young delegate stood very still for a moment. Then she made a gesture with her inner limbs that, in Arathi culture, meant something like, "I will remember that." She walked away down the corridor. Yara stood alone for a moment, in the white light of Keth Station, listening to the hum of dozens of languages moving through the air around her. Then she went back inside. There was work to do.